When people get older, there is a high probability that they will rely on pensions for old age. Elderly people without pensions, if they want to live their later years without worries, unless they have a large amount of property or have filial children, can they rest assured in their old age? Aunt Fong, who is 60 years old, neither has a pension nor has a large amount of property. Her only son is also unfilial, unwilling to support her in old age. In such a situation, Aunt Fong took an alternative path, providing herself with a carefree old age. Aunt Fong's self-narration: I am 60 years old this year and have always lived in the countryside. More than 20 years ago, my husband was working on a construction site when he passed away suddenly due to an accidental work injury. After my husband passed away, the boss of the construction site gave me 300,000 yuan. He said that all this money was borrowed. If I thought it was too little and wanted more money, even if he sold everything he had, he couldn't gather more. The boss said that if I was willing to settle privately, I could accept this 300,000 yuan, sign a consent form, and this matter would be concluded. If I disagreed and wanted to sue for more money, then I wouldn't even get this 300,000 yuan because he was already insolvent. Even if I sued, he had no money to compensate me, as the construction site wasn't making any money. I was very clear about this. When my husband was working at the construction site, the boss often delayed paying wages, sometimes for several months at a time. If the boss had money, he wouldn't have delayed wages. I was worried that if I didn't accept this 300,000 yuan, I wouldn't get any compensation. Thinking this way, I accepted the 300,000 yuan and signed the consent form with the construction site boss. With my husband's death, the pillar of the family was gone. Previously, we managed to get by relying on my husband's wages from the construction site and my income from farming. But now, without my husband's income, the family's finances quickly fell into difficulties. Although I had 300,000 yuan in hand, I didn't dare to spend it. 300,000 yuan wouldn't last long, and if it was all spent, how would I live in the future? The year my husband passed away, our son was already 18 years old. Seeing me constantly frowning, looking helpless, he took the initiative to say that he wanted to go to the city to work and earn money. At that time, our son had just taken the college entrance exam, but his results were very poor, and he didn't even get into a junior college. I thought, since my son wasn't good at studying, it might be better for him to go out into society and earn more money. With this thought, I agreed to let him go to the city to work. Before he left, I gave him 10,000 yuan and told him that this money should only be used in times of emergency and not to be touched easily. My son took the 10,000 yuan and went to the city. Not long after, he called me to say that he had found a job in the city, working as a car mechanic. He said he could earn 3,000 yuan a month, and that once he mastered the skills, his salary would double. I thought this job was good, and I felt particularly happy inside. I encouraged my son, telling him to learn the skills well in the city and not to give up halfway. But then my son changed his tone, saying he wanted to buy a house, and asked me to take out my husband's compensation money to help him buy a house. My son said that the rent for the house he was renting in the city was 1,000 yuan a month, and that after paying the landlord, he had nothing left. Instead of letting the landlord earn the money, it would be better to take out a loan and buy a house of his own. Then, the money used for rent could be used to pay off the mortgage. Once the mortgage was paid off, the house would still be his. Hearing my son's words, I hesitated. I was a rural person, with no pension, and my husband was gone. If this money was also gone, how would I support myself in old age? I told my son about my concerns. My son said that my retirement wasn't a problem at all. Once he mastered his skills and his salary doubled, He would bring me to the city and support me for life. My son's words made me overjoyed. The thought of living in the city made my heart blossom with happiness. I immediately transferred the remaining 290,000 yuan to my son to help him buy a house in the city. My son took out a loan to buy a 3-bedroom apartment. Because there was no money for decoration, he had to live in the unfinished apartment. My son said that it wasn't too late to decorate it once he had saved enough money. Although I was living in the countryside and had no way to earn money, I still worked hard to earn money for my son's house decoration. I raised a lot of chickens and ducks, and also raised 2 pigs. At the end of the year, I sold all these chickens, ducks, and pigs, which could at least earn me several thousand yuan. When my son came home for the new year, I handed over the money from selling the chickens, ducks, and pigs to him, telling him to quickly save up enough money to decorate the house so that he wouldn't have to live in the unfinished apartment, which was really inconvenient. My son said that decorating a house was a big deal, and it couldn't be done casually. If the decoration wasn't satisfactory, and he wanted to redo it later, it would be a big project. I asked my son how much money was needed to decorate the house satisfactorily. My son said at least 150,000 yuan. Hearing that decorating the house would cost 150,000 yuan, I immediately lost heart. I thought to myself, when would we ever be able to save up this 150,000 yuan? I advised my son, saying that our family's conditions weren't good, and we couldn't possibly decorate the house as luxuriously as city folks do. We didn't have that kind of luck, but my son said he didn't believe in luck. He wanted to live a good life, and as long as he had a firm goal, he could definitely achieve his wish. My son didn't listen to my advice, and I had no choice but to work together with him to save money for the house decoration. In the blink of an eye, 3 years passed, and we still hadn't saved up the 150,000 yuan for the decoration. During the new year, my son brought home a girl. He said that this girl was his girlfriend. The girl looked like a rich city girl, with an air of nobility about her. The way she looked at me was also full of contempt and disdain, which made me feel very uncomfortable. My son told me that the girl's family was very wealthy, and if they got married, we wouldn't have to worry about the decoration costs. For the girl's family, 150,000 yuan for the decoration was nothing. Although I felt this was unreliable, my son had always been determined, and even if I objected, he wouldn't listen to me. So I could only listen quietly, without raising any objections. After a while, my son called to tell me that the house had started being decorated. The decoration costs were all covered by his girlfriend's family. After the house was decorated, my son and his girlfriend got married. On the day of their wedding, although I attended the ceremony, I was placed in the most inconspicuous corner. From beginning to end, no one knew I was the groom's mother. My son knew I was feeling bad, so he comforted me, saying that our family was poor and that I should endure it for now. Once he became successful in the future, he would definitely make me proud. Since my son asked me to endure it, I could only endure it. I had no husband, no money, so I pinned all my hopes for the rest of my life on my son. I didn't dare not listen to him. Although my son was working in the city, and his salary had doubled, I still had to rely on myself to live. My son was living a difficult life, and I didn't want to add any extra burden to him. Although the land at home wasn't much, it was enough to feed me, but I still wanted to help my son more. So I often sold eggs, and when I made some money, I sent it to him. I hoped that my son would be happy, and that he could live a good life with his wife. But unexpectedly, after my son got married, he gradually distanced himself from me. He no longer called me frequently, and when I called him, he rarely answered. At first, I thought my son was busy, so I didn't think much of it. But later, I found out from others that my daughter-in-law had given birth to a daughter, but I knew nothing about it. I couldn't help but be heartbroken. I immediately called my son, but my daughter-in-law answered. She said that my son was working, and she had something to say to me. My daughter-in-law told me that I shouldn't call my son anymore in the future because he was very busy. When I had time, I should go to the city to take care of my granddaughter. Hearing this, I was shocked. My daughter-in-law had never respected me, and now she even ordered me to take care of my granddaughter. I was not willing to be ordered around by her, but I couldn't refuse directly. So I told her that I was getting older, and my health wasn't very good, so I couldn't take care of my granddaughter. But my daughter-in-law said that since I was getting old, I had to rely on my son for support in my old age, so I had to listen to her. When she said this, I was so angry that I hung up the phone. Afterwards, I thought that I couldn't rely on my son for my old age. Since my son and daughter-in-law didn't care about me, I had to plan my own old age. I didn't want to wait until I was too old and unable to take care of myself before making plans. I couldn't rely on others, so I had to rely on myself. After thinking it over, I made a decision. I planned to sell my house in the countryside and buy a small apartment in the city. Although the apartment was small, it was enough for me to live in. I didn't need to rely on my son and daughter-in-law, so I wouldn't be at their mercy. After selling my house in the countryside, I moved to the city and lived in a small apartment. I found a job as a janitor, which wasn't tiring and allowed me to support myself. Since then, I have been living a carefree life. Now that I'm old, I still have no pension or savings, but I don't feel anxious or afraid. I can live my later years without relying on my son, and I'm satisfied with that. I've learned that in this world, the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. Others, even your closest relatives, can let you down, but as long as you have your own strength, you can live a good life in any situation. So, don't pin your hopes on others, but instead rely on yourself to support your old age.